So, to make a segue from the first talk to the second, and apologies for those that missed that one, I told you those stories at the end about the pinball piece, and I call it site-type specific piece, because it was for a boat harbor, but not one boat harbor, but any boat harbor. There were some radical things being developed in my music, and I think the thing I want to raise now that is going to become rather central to this one and the one that follows is it wasn't only about innovation and my move from instruments and voice to sounds. It was also putting in question the way we partition music in our societies. When I was studying ethnomusicology, sort of like ethnomusicology 101 was cutting music into three areas, the folk traditions of the world, or the oral traditions of the world, art music or court music, depending on how it was called in different societies, and then commercial forms of music, which probably existed in all sorts of forms historically, but took off like mad in the 20th century, and the rest is history. In a book I published in 2007, which I'll talk about more tomorrow, I put in question where a good deal of electroacoustic music fits. Is it art music? Is it commercial music? Looking at my bank balance, I think most of that funding has come from higher education and not my music. Is it folk music? Well, I will come back to that one, but we're not ready to go there quite yet. And I do believe that a lot of sound-based music is made in similar ways, and that there's a body of knowledge that fits with it, which again, I'll come back to tomorrow. But I think when I got to that pinball piece, and the Turkish cleaner found it of relevance to his people, I realized I wasn't dealing for something that was going to be in traditional concert performance. This piece was for anyone, anywhere. And that was an aha moment. So just to kick this one off, I didn't want to say it in the first one because it's leading on to this, leading from that. So this is part 2, Crossing Artistic Borders, which I announced this morning, and confronting a silo mentality in the arts, which it's interesting that I've been here a week and 2 days, and the word silo has come up 3 times, not by me, referring to the demography of and the relationships in the South Africa College of Music. Most of that was framed in terms of gossip, of tensions between, let us just choose at random, opera and electroacoustic music, but I could have named other ones. And the silo mentality tends to lead to awkward situations of various types. In my case, it was awkward, but for an entirely different reason. We move on. As last time, so that you can follow the map of this short hour, I started off talking about moving towards a professional career, not that I wasn't in that first lot, but things begin to solidify and I start getting invited to do stuff a heck of a lot more. And here we get into the silos, being a video composer in France, a theater composer in Germany, and an avant-garde and tech sound composer in the Netherlands. But how did this happen? Then the important moment where I realized it was only 24 hours a day and you can't magic 36 or more, that I was going to stop, largely, not totally, stop writing for instruments and voice and only concentrate on sounds, which in many ways is a shame, but I just couldn't handle all of the things coming in, and I also felt a little schizophrenic writing one way for the one and the other way for the other. And thus I ended up composing what I have called, in that same 2007 book, sound-based music. A key idea that's related to this segue from the previous talk that I want to share is that I think a major influence in me and all of the types of work I do shifted a bit from John Cage, whom I mentioned quite a bit in the first hour, to Heiner Müller, whom I will introduce to those who don't know who he was. From the abstract to dramaturgy, and therefore what I call from art for art's sake to art for life's sake. If there's anything I share with you to make you either angry or agree or think, that slide will be when it will happen. That's my prediction. Then I'm going to return to the subject of sampling, which we kind of kicked around a little bit in the first talk, because it becomes more obvious that what's going on with my music. As I will explain, it suddenly got recognized in 2009, which indeed is 15 years ago. But I have to tell you, I was in my 50s, so that's late to realize something essential in what you've been doing for decades. And I'll talk about that. And then selected mid-year pieces as I had done selected early pieces in the first talk. So, yes, it turned out that in the 80s, late 70s into the 80s, I became a video composer in France, mainly because of the collaboration with the person whose name I mentioned briefly before this wonderful lunchtime concert, Michel Jaffrenou, and we'll come back to him. A theater composer in Germany, not solely, but mainly because I started working a lot with this guy called Heiner Müller. And for those that don't know, and taking the time that this took place into account, Heiner Müller was an Eastern German. He lived behind the Berlin Wall. And an avant-garde and tech sound composer in the Netherlands. Well, there weren't that many radical figures in the Netherlands. There was a lot of good new music being made, but people that were really out there, few and far between. So I was this naturalized citizen who didn't quite fit, but I think my music doesn't quite fit anyway, so that was no change for me. And the tech sound business is going to become blatantly obvious over these 2 days as you hear samples of my work. And for those students who already did, because you guys heard me speaking pieces, and that came from somewhere, and that was actually the 1910s in Dadaism with the sound poems that Schwitters and others made. So what I was doing wasn't new at all. I was like third generation of that stuff, but it was like stepping into a hot bath. And why would I want to get out of it, even though not that people are doing it? It's just good. So I end up making music that I think is good as opposed to opportunistic or whatever else. So how did it happen? Well, it just became a pattern of behavior, and suddenly producers, artists in France and Francophone Belgium were asking me to team up with video artists because I'd worked with Jaffrenou for all these years. And other than that case of the Marina piece in the French Biennale, I didn't get invited terribly often for all these pieces of music. I got invited to work with video artists because they saw I did it very well with somebody. And that's what I do. You may have met in your careers musicians who are really talented but work with dance companies. And so they get associated as composers for dance companies. Whereas they're just good composers who also compose well for dance companies, but they get siloed into that. And I ended up having 3.5 silos in my 30s, which was very weird because I didn't want to be siloed off. I liked all of these things, and I didn't care where I did it. So, oops, press that one. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but for those who weren't in this morning, all of the sound clips I played were actually vocal and instrumental pieces, although I explained what I was doing coming into electroacoustic and then called computer music. But as my career advanced, I decided that was going to be my focus, and when there were opportunities to work with instruments and voices, I wouldn't, just decline them, but I wasn't going out of my way to look for new projects that were in the note-based music paradigm, as I call it. And that's a major decision because it is a commitment, and it was also reflected in publications, more on that tomorrow, and more in terms of the curricula I wrote. Just to give a couple of examples. The first curriculum I wrote at the University of Amsterdam in the 1970s, late 70s, was called Experimental Music. And I did some research on it, and there was nowhere in the world that you could study that. It could be a module, or there could be somebody teaching who was willing to address the subject, but there was no course, there was no major in that. And so just the focus was radical in education. What I did later got much, much more radical, but that's for tomorrow, not today. So yes, that was a turning point, and thus I ended up composing what I call sound-based music. And I would even go so far as to say that tonight's piece for Dizu, which I can't wait, even though he's playing musical bow and there's lots of notes flying about, and there's lots of notes flying about on the recordings, because they're recordings of him and nothing else, I hope you move from note to sound easily. And in the pieces at the lunchtime concert, many can be accused of doing the same. And thanks for that, because that strengthened your works and made it such an enjoyable event. Right. So I think I shared enough about how Cage could have inspired me. I mean, the most important inspiration, besides the delicious man himself, was he wasn't my teachers who was teaching me this music I didn't want to write. And he was opening minds, and he was opening minds in other art forms, and he was opening minds in society. The only problem I had with him, am I allowed to share this? This is like going to confession. There were several performances of Cage where I thought, what am I doing here? The score was great, the concept was great, what those people were doing to make the piece happen was great. But I would say two things. One, this type of music, I'm not talking about all those pieces, because those who know Cage know loads of pieces that are beautiful to listen to. So this is not the broad brush. This is about certain pieces at a certain time. There are certain pieces that are infinitely more fun or interesting, or both, to perform than to watch. How many times have you sat at a concert where you thought, I bet they're having a good time trying to figure out what they're doing, but I'm sitting here and can I go home now? Or something of the like. Or get a beer. That sounds better. This is not a crass condemnation, but I do believe the composers that are writing for pieces to be performed should enjoy the act of communal performance and not ask people to pay money and sit there and watch them figuring out what they're doing. It's not necessary, and it's high art taken a step too far. And we talked about marginalization of music this morning, and that doesn't help much. So I'm not against it, but then do it for a good reason. And then we'll get back to Michel Jaffrenou, the video artist, who really was a great enrichment because he was about 10 years older than I, and just totally committed to making art. And he was French, so what do we associate with French? Okay, let's get really superficial here. A joie de vivre, an enjoyment of life. A very colorful and humorous and of the moment kind of attitude. And as I said this morning, when I met that guy, he did wear a beret. I met him at a cafe sitting outside, talking until the cows came home, because he had no deadlines. He just did his thing, and I went, oh man, that's a life that I would never have, but isn't lovely, wow. So for me, not everything in France is like that, I can tell you, but that was a beautiful bubble to be situated in. But you meet people in your life, and bless me, I've met a heck of a lot, and I've been enriched by meeting people, and this last week I've been enriched by being here and teaching a classroom full of all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds who were brought up in all sorts of languages. Very nice. You don't know how good you have it to have all of this together and bouncing off each other. It's marvelous. Well, one of the people I was to meet happened almost by accident, or certainly by coincidence. It was my first trip to Eastern Germany. And for young people here, you simply cannot imagine the angst going into an East Bloc country, particularly that one, because of the lack of freedom of expression, the fact that you could be busted for anything at any given moment, etc., etc., etc. But I met a soprano and her husband, a musicologist. We hit it off like a wildfire. I went to Leipzig to visit them, to go to contemporary music concerts. I was really interested in East Bloc composition because there's a political undertone to everything I've been talking about today, even though I haven't used the word. And lo and behold, during the few days I was there was a school being opened just outside East Berlin. That was the Paul Dessau Oberschule. Now, there must be at least one person here who identified that name. Paul Dessau was one of the finest East German composers, along with Hans Eisler. Both of them worked with Bertolt Brecht. Both of them were political. Both of them had trouble with the US. And, you know, to go to the opening of the school was really interesting for me, because you had the nomenclatura of art in Eastern Germany, a couple of token Russians thrown in, a couple of top political figures there, and an American-born Dutchman figuring out what's going on, because Mrs. Dessau held a drinks party afterwards, and I'm going, well, that just looks like another opening of a school with a rich lady inviting people over. Wasn't she nice? And I met Heiner Müller. Now, here we go. Heiner Müller was by far the best-known playwright in Eastern Germany, by a country mile. He was known as the son of Brecht. And the second time I went, and the second time I went to Eastern Germany, I went to see him. I saw a play that he'd written and directed, and it was mildly political. It's called Der Bau, the building, or the act. And you had all sorts in this theater, all sorts. You had policemen, army, intellectuals, poor people, educators, I don't know what, farmers, sitting in this theater, packed to the gills, all watching the Berlin Wall being pushed a millimeter, not coming down. But this artist had said something that was written so well that the criticism of the whole system was just part of the narrative of the play, but everybody knew it, and he got away with it. He was famous around the globe, and I considered it ever so fortunate to meet the man. Not only did I meet him, but he took an instant liking to me. So I was invited to his house after the school opened. I walked away from his house with his complete works. And he said, just choose anything, do anything with it that you like. I suggest you try this one. And there was a poem there. I don't think you can do anything with that. So I had 6 volumes and that. So the thing I was supposed to look at was one of the best pieces of writing I'd ever seen. And I don't know if you've ever done this in your work, but I started to hear what I think could be done musically with this text. And I got stuck in early Schoenberg. So before he was doing 12-tone music, it was atonal, it was narrative, and it was rough sit for me. Glückliche Hand, for example. Really rough sit for me. And I was not going to compose like that, just like I wasn't going to compose like my teachers at Columbia University. So I told him I'm not going to do it. And Heiner Goebbels, the jazz artist, did do that text, and it was a bestseller album. So there's a happy ending on that one. But the poem that I couldn't do anything ended up being one of 13 songs I wrote. Now this is interesting. I've just admitted to you I've stopped composing for instruments and voice. But with Müller's text, I had no choice. And my melodies got another chance in mid-career. And I wrote 13 songs, and I called them Mittellieder. And the first time they were on the radio, bless me, who would have guessed? They put the Goethe-Lieder of Schubert, followed by the Mittellieder of Landy on West German radio. They hadn't siloed me in because they put me somewhere I would never go. I'd never be in a concert with Schubert in my life, in your wildest dreams. And I played it for him the next time I saw him. We went on a trip to Bulgaria with that Bulgarian wife I mentioned before. And he couldn't believe what he heard. And I said, yeah, well, I don't compose like this at all, but that's what happened with your texts. And we ended up working together for a decade, up to, but not including, The Wall Falling. Why? Well, he kept working after the wall fell. In fact, he became one of the directors of Berliner Ensemble, the most famous theater in Germany. But I asked him, Heiner, if this wall falls, what will you do? And his answer was, I won't know what to write about. I'll have nothing to say. Which was a beautiful portrait of, and wasn't true because he continued, but his whole life was being an artist of huge political importance. I moved back to Cage. He was a thinker of great revolutionary thought. Everything was possible, no more rules. I don't know where to go after that. Or I can just say, as I said in the classroom this week, thesis is what we knew, antithesis was what was going on in the 20th century. The only thing to come after that is synthesis, because you can't go any further than Cage. But Cage had no political power. He was a guru of thought. But I just, you know, what radical ideas am I going to grab onto here? Whereas Miller had this impact. And then he ended up making radical theater late in life. So the 5 plays or so that I did with him introduced me to the dramaturg. So I have to explain why I'm doing what I'm doing in music to get it staged so that they can write about it in the newspaper, etc. But there was a second dramaturg in East Germany, and I'll come to the end of the story now, who was a member of the Communist Party. And for me to work in the East Bloc, I had to tell them who I, the poison of the West, was to work in their theaters. And I said, well, let's talk about a pinball machine. Do you realize what destruction is doing in capitalist society? Oh, that's good, we'll have him. And the idea of explaining what you're doing musically. Not one of my teachers, although I am certain, having just met a couple of people today, and knowing Theo and getting to know Meryl this week, I'm sure you do. But nobody asked me about that. Why are you doing this? What are you trying to communicate, and who is it for? Who is contemporary music for? Who is electroacoustic music for? How many of us articulate that? If anybody will listen to my piece and enjoy it or find it interesting, that's good enough. No, it isn't. That's why there are 24 people. That's why Bode Electrons isn't in a bigger room full of thousands of people, because we haven't done that. And these are things that have been really weighing me down. So Müller became at least as important to me as Cage, because by creating, or let's put it this way, recreating a communication loop in our new music was a way to communicate with an audience. When we're trying to have an intention and investigate reception of what we're doing, we're back into old-fashioned art, which was about communication. All that stuff I was taught at Columbia University of intellectual ways of using a 12-tone roll or another algorithm to do something without ever discussing emotion or whether it can be perceived or anything like that was a dead end. And of course they can be combined. But nobody showed me, nobody discussed it, it just wasn't there. Now I'm using a bit of extreme way of describing this stuff. It's not that black and white. You know, we're inhabiting that space in the mean place. But what happened to me was Cage slightly lost status with me because it was dislocated, whereas Müller was essential in his country. Without him, they couldn't move as far forward as they did. Was his art that radical? In a way, yes, but in other ways, no. It was a play that had 3 acts and a couple of intervals and all that. So dramaturgy became essential to my thought as a musician, to my teaching, to my writing, and abstraction for the sake of abstraction was not working anymore. And yet abstraction in the 20th century has enriched art beyond description. So I'm not going against it, but having these other considerations applied to the abstraction that you're using might lead to greater success for what we're passionate about. And then in 2010-ish, I had this idea when I was invited to give a keynote that I had to challenge art for art's sake, because that was what I was taught, and have its antidote. And it wasn't what I've got on the screen here, art for life's sake, which works much better, but I used the ambiguous art for goodness sake. Because it's either art for the sake of goodness, or what you just heard me, because I pronounced it that way, art for goodness sake. So let's share it somehow. And this combination on this slide has just made me so aware of what we had been missing in all these radical revolutions of the 20th century, was putting a Y to it and then adding it to the communication and then making Webern essential listening. Because wasn't that work precious? But it got lost in the ether of nobody explaining how to listen, what to hold on to, all these other things that are essential to the musical experience. And the most important aspect of that, again, to be returned to tomorrow, offering a listener with no experience something to hold on to identify a potential shared experience. I think we need to do that in music. If you disagree, it's perfectly fine, we can battle it out, but these are the things that I absolutely feel are essential for me to proceed. So I returned to sampling because that was what I kept talking about this morning. And it was just the strangest thing that happened. In 2009, there was a wonderful conference, I mean, totally wonderful conference in Berlin called Re***. So recycling, remixing, you know, recomposing, etc., etc. It was about sampling art. And by then, of course, as we all know, hip-hop is a legendary art form, and sampling and turntablism and all that is just common stuff, and the word sample is common parlance, which it wasn't when I was young. And so you would think that that music, the elder statesman of the arts, the sampling, was really the most developed. Fine art, video, writing, all sorts. Highly political. The way that memes have come out of contemporary art, the likes of which we couldn't imagine in contemporary music. I was sitting there flabbergasted seeing and stories of people just sampling a crazy guy dancing in a parade in Berlin, and that turns into a court case, and I don't know, 70 million views and all sorts of resamplings of this thing, and whoa, that's all out there. We're not paying attention to this. And this is part of our society, it's part of our life. But I was invited to be keynote of it. The other keynote was an American who was highly published on pop sampling. And so we complemented each other. But it was the first time in my life that I went somewhere as a keynote and learned more than they did. It just made me aware that we're siloing off our arts and we're not that aware of what's going on in the other arts, which can be so helpful to us. Even though by then I'd done arts exhibitions, video exhibitions, you name it, performance art, I've done all of that. But I just wasn't aware of any of that. And it was just like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. Because I've been doing this my whole life. It was without even using the right word, and it's been so enriching, but these guys just lapped me. Just, whoa, amazing. So that really helped me identify where the journey was going to take me. So let's move on. As I said this morning, I met Jaffanu quite early in my first European performance. I was still in the States. Was at a gallery exhibition of this guy called Michel Jaffanu, who sadly passed away earlier this year. And he was to evolve from a fine artist sculptor to a video artist to a new media artist. And at the end of his career, the National Library of France held a 3-month exhibition of an overview of his work. So we're talking about a not unimportant artist, but I knew him as the emerging guy sitting on the sidewalk at the cafe having a drink. So that's the guy I knew. And things took off over the years. So we started with small gallery pieces, and I put him on in some concerts. And just jump about 5 years. And he got an invitation from the Pompidou Center in Paris to do a multi-video piece with a musician and some performers, which was called Electronic Video Circus. So we did this in the large hall of the Pompidou Center, 26 video monitors on stage in the form of a circus tent, 2 of which could go up and down. I had 6 channels of sound, so I had surround sound, by which time that was all I was doing. Because immersion is the way to go. Immersion, intimacy, those are the 2 I's in my life. And it was amazing, you know. Here I was, this guy starting with 24.3 people in the audience, and here I am having 500 every evening in the Pompidou Center. And once I started doing theater, it was a run of 60 to 100 performances of 800. So, I mean, and some television documents of his performances. It didn't make me rich, it didn't make me famous, they didn't go to the theater because I did the music, they went to the play. But this new music, this new electroacoustic stuff, went down like sweeties because there was a visual context for it. So the nothing to see of the 40s and 50s was problematic, apparently. So I did this piece with Jaffrenu, and it toured internationally, and it was, I just loved it. And in this piece, 85% of the sounds were recomposed pieces. And because of the laws regarding musical citation, I tried not ever to surpass 8 measures, because that's when you start paying, and there was no budget for that. And I have been told, just a historical anecdote, that Luciano Berio had done a piece in the same studio at the Pompidou Center, and he was stuck with the 8 measures. And so they called me le maître 8 mesures, master 8 measures, because I had to do this for months. The piece was successful, and a guy from the Belgian television invited us to do a television version of the piece. Piece was an hour, television version of the piece was a quarter of an hour. We even shortened the title to Video Circus. Dizu in his inaugural here last week impressed all of us by saying he's performed in 95 countries. I have 2 because of this, but I wasn't in 94 of the 95 countries when it was presented. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this clip from just after halfway, well, 3/4 of the piece towards the end. So here it is. Whoops. I need to do that. And then I need to do that. Thank you, Lisa. Now this was 1984, and for a video, that was as advanced as humanly possible. And as I said in the classroom this week, so sorry for those who are getting it the second time, there was no way to synchronize. All those things that happened synchronously was by me hitting a play button and praying that the things happened at the right moment. And you saw things happen when fingers touched. That was 15 seconds after I hit the play button. The likelihood of getting that right was 1 in 10,000. So we did have to repeat the tense a few times to get anywhere in this work. But you can imagine how gratifying it is to see how the music is pushing up the video and the video is pushing it. Neither of them would work on their own. Neither of them would work on their own. And this synergy and collaboration has been what has been the most rewarding aspect of these. It's been. So we moved to Müller. Oh, no, we're not doing that again. And I'm going to do this more rapidly. I've told you that I wrote the song cycle, and when I played him the songs, I think I mentioned we were visiting Bulgaria. We were in the capital, Sofia. And you guys have had a lot of power cuts for a long time here. And my heart bleeds every time the BBC reminds me that right now it's getting better, so may it remain so. But when I was in Bulgaria, it was the water that went. And everywhere I went, there was no water. And Müller says, I think I know where we can get some water. We'll go to the Hilton Hotel. There was an American Hilton Hotel in the East Block, and we went into the Hilton Hotel, and no, there wasn't. So we couldn't get a coffee, and going to the toilets was an experience that you would like to forget, and there we are. So he wrote a little text spontaneously for me, maybe even on a serviette napkin. So I had a unique text from this enormously important writer, and I was blessed. And I added some other texts, and I added some crazy world music and crazy sounds, and I made a piece, which I'm not going to play now because it would take too much time, but it seemed historically right to compose a piece called No Water Music. That took a little while. Gee. No Handel fans in the room? Gee. Okay. One of the pieces of Müller's that I did that I am going to spend I'm going to spend a second on two things, but one of the Müller pieces that I did was called Bildbeschreibung, and I did say he got more radical, and this was a radical piece. Bildbeschreibung, Beeldbeschrijving for the Afrikaners, is a description of an image. And the text is literally that. There are no characters, there's no dialogue, there's just a description of image. Theater director, have a nice day. Sort of like Cage. So I considered that the reduction of theater, and I was invited by the director to do the premiere of that piece in Austria. Fine. But I was so amazed by how the courage in the situation he was in, because this is, the piece was from '84, I think. So 5 years before the wall was going to fall. And I said, okay, well, if Bildbeschreibung is the reduction of theater, B is the reduction of Bildbeschreibung. So I'm going to deconstruct this piece and make a piece for a live speaker / vocalist and various voices on tape. One of the voices is Heiner Müller's, which was recorded on a cheap cassette player at his place. So quality, not great. Doesn't matter. So I cut it up into words and fragments, and for those of you that have already seen me perform Gertrude Stein, you know how I do that, but it was a little bit more abstract in the case of Heiner Müller. And the stage, it was 3 channels of sound in a triangle with the vocalist in front of the other one, so that sort of makes a B. And for those of you who know German music traditions, what's the note B in German? Anybody know?
B flat?
B is not B in Germany. It's B flat.
Oh.
B is H in Germany. We don't have an H, but they do. How that happened, history books, don't know. So the piece goes from B to B, and it means there's a semitone switch in it. So there's a lot of B in this piece. That's for the musicologists, but I just thought I would share it. Izan, this is the one where we have to bring the volume down. So there were various performances, mainly by females doing the live part, but there was a get-together like this in Berlin, where they talked two composers who worked with two famous writers, and now I'm really blanking, but I will remember his name. A German guy who's a sound artist who worked with Robert Wilson a lot. And I worked with Heiner Miller, so they spent 2 days talking about musicians working with playwrights and how collaborations work. And I performed this piece the one and only time I was to do it. So this is a clip from B. Oh, I'm playing it, aren't I? Jeez. Waiting for you to do it, I got it. This is the very beginning. Nothing here.
Was? Oder was?
Alles gesehen.
Ja, thank you.
Himmel. Mann.
Nur ein Z.
Raum.
Alles gesehen.
Die Sonne. Sonne.
Sonne.
Wenn es vollkommen
Die
ist.
Sonne.
Schwanger von Sturm.
Tiere.
Schwanger von Sturm.
Sonne. Sonne. Die Sonne.
Tiere kommen nur als Wolken.
Sonne.
Die Sonne.
Sonne. Sonne. Sonne.
Himmel.
Die Sonne.
Wenn es Wolken sind.
Sonne.
Schwanger von Sturm. Schwanger von Sturm.
Sonne.
Die Sonne.
Sonne. Sonne.
Oder
Das Bild.
eine Landschaft.
Das Bild.
Das
Eine
Bild.
Landschaft.
Oder?
Das Bild.
Und. Oder.
Eine Landschaft.
Und. Oder.
Das Bild.
Und
Ein Bild.
oder
Als ob er ein Bild nicht
Oder?
fassen kann und oder ein anderes nicht sehen will.
Oder.
ein Mobil.
Ein Bild
Und?
nicht fassen kann
Oder?
oder ein anderes nicht sehen will. Als ob er ein Bild
Oder?
nicht fassen kann und oder ein
Nicht
anderes
sehen will. Nicht vergessen.
Himmel. Himmel.
ein Museum.
Die Sonne im
Mann gegen Vogel und Frau.
Frau gegen Vogel und Mann.
Vogel gegen Frau.
Frau gegen Vogel und Mann.
One could speak of a word painting, and you don't need German to just kind of go with the flow of this. If you have German, obviously you're getting all sorts of things. And as the piece goes on, it almost gets into, I think I know what it's about, but you never do. So it's a really interesting kind of journey, and also interesting for the performer. But my German's good, but I don't think I'm a convincing vocalist German actor, so I don't know if I'm ever going to do it again. I'm going to, Theo, just a time warning. I'm going to go slightly over, and this one I'm going to shrink the next one.
Most welcome, thank you.
Yep. I just thought I would tell you about a performance of his Philoctetes that I did in Switzerland, because it kind of typifies one of these elements of sampling that is just kind of inexplicable, where a kind of cage mentality was applied to a Miller play, because I had a director who was doing some pretty wild stuff with the interpretation of it. It was a bare stage in a huge theater, and so the landscape was the bareness of the stage. And there weren't that many costumes in it, and so there was a great physicality in a performance that really didn't demand it. I thought that was really interesting. And Switzerland is not around the corner from Amsterdam, so I was living in the theater, because there were 3 flats for visiting artists. And so I heard the sonic landscape of this theater, the municipal theater of Basel. And I'm just going to name three things that I heard in the theater that I was to include in the sound design composition, what do you want to call this? It's all the above. For this production that ran about 50 times. First of all, my room was near the top of the lift, the elevator shaft, and there was a piece of mechanical stuff there that would really go boom every time it went in another direction. Not good for sleep. Therefore, it had to be in the play. In our rehearsal space, which is in the basement, bare light bulbs, hundreds of them. And when you turn the lights on in the morning, they would warm up and best spatialization. Your specializations were amazing, but you can't do that. Only old bare light bulbs, warming up randomly, every day, differently. It's just an amazing sensation. The Tonmeisterin, the woman that I was working with in the theater, took 24 lines down from a studio, got 24 fantastic microphones and recorded it. Then we bought 96 car loudspeakers, covered the theater with these cheap loudspeakers, and had them clicking during the performance. People were going, where the hell am I? Marvelous. But the absolute killer is a sound that everybody hears in that theater. For disabled people and for other reasons, there's a lift, that elevator in the middle of the theater, which will take you to the entrance from where you buy your tickets and get your drinks. And because of the air conditioning in the theater, it turns out that this thing, when it goes from the basement to the main floor to the upper floor, the air pressure in the building changes, as does the pitch. And when it's moving, you've got a glissando from pitch A to pitch B to pitch C. So I just recorded it for 3 hours. And that was very present. So I just took the theater as the composition. And when that thing went click, it sounded like the technicians in the theater were dropping a wrench. So the intendant, the guy that runs the theater, said that sound has to go. It sounds like my men are not working very well. I said, no, that's the sound of your theater. I have to have it. It's sort of like Morton Feldman writing a concerto and there were only 2 notes for triangle, and the guy said, God, I'm paying so much. Do I have to pay this musician for 2 notes? Yes. Oh. So that's an example of the kind of stuff I did with Miller. Now, I would say that both of these pieces are not for everybody. I accept that. I was dealing with a high art writer, and so I did high art sound design, but it took me to places I never would have gone otherwise, and so I'm sharing that. Oh, come on, don't do that. Okay, so we moved towards the world of text sound, and I had the pleasure, when I moved to Amsterdam in 1976, there was a text sound poetry festival at the Stedelijk Museum, the Modern Museum of Amsterdam, where virtually every big name that was alive was present. And it was a happy day for me because I met like 24 people I was dying to meet, and friendships came out of that were lifelong friendships from Sweden to Paris. And one of the several Parisians I met was a guy named Bernard Heidsieck. Heidsieck is a cousin of the Champagne Company and worked at the Banque de France, so he was not a poor dude, but a fantastic text sound poet. And one of the pieces he made, which had the title Poème Partition 5, Poem Score Number 5, was based on an interest in the heart. He knew somebody because he had a network of richer people, I would assume. He met a senior cardiologist, and he said, I'm thinking of doing a piece on the heart and what can affect the heart. And he said, oh, well, I have this vinyl, and this is what all our students have to listen to of the heart and the heart illnesses. So I'll just lend it to you. So we lent it to him, and then translated these rhythms and these patterns into French. So the healthy heart, he came up with the most brilliant thing ever, was kipa, 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 kipa. Who's knocking? Who's knocking? It's better in French because it's only one. But the first illness was a ventricle problem because I found a cardiologist in Amsterdam and it was on CD by then. Foo is subjunctive, doesn't matter. That's a ventricle that's kind of gone wrong. So this is a gory tale, and it takes him about 50 minutes to go through the dictionary of heart ailments, and it's a tour de force. And I just said, Bernard, I just love this piece. Could we collaborate with him? He said, oh, I've had some collaborations, they don't work. I work with a jazz guy, it was okay, and horrible. So let's try. And so I added some electronic sound. I recorded him, and I would put him across 4 channels, and he would perform it live. And finally, in the 4th channel, I took the loudspeaker on that side in the back and put an oscilloscope up here in the front, which was tracking that one, not the loudspeaker it was next to. And of course, when it was electronic, it was like dance. But when he said "Kiba," you were in the operating theater, which is terrifying. So he did it in a contemporary music festival, and lo and behold, he's always performed his work by himself, knows it amazingly, but when he is led by time, he collapses and said, this is a great experience, you do it from now on. I took it over for future performances internationally. So this is a clip from Mon cœur se recommande à vous. Again, when I was in secondary school, I was in that magical choir that I talked about this morning. My heart offers itself to you, is what that is. And that's Roland de Lassus, Orlando di Lasso, who wrote that madrigal. And, well, you get a bit of it, actually, in this clip.
Succès, qui bat, c'est miette, dit molle, village, qui bat, roulement, qui fonde, qui bat, civement. Et te tourne ou te tord, te convulse et t'étouffe, te tortille ou te tranque, et te trouble ou te tord, te retourne et te tourne, et te touffe, te tortille, et te tronque et te tord, te convulse et te tourne, te... Qui bat?
Et te tourne ou te tord, te convulse et t'étouffe, te tortille ou te tronque, et te trouble ou te tord, te retourne et te touche, et te touffe, te tortille et te tronque, et te tord, te convulse et te tourne, te...
Qui bat?
Those are some sick hearts, but all those words mean something. So if you do have French, you're just saying, what is going on here? It's absolutely brilliant, and it was so much fun to make. Now, I'm not as user-friendly, I think, as I am today, but the speech, it's just so inviting, and it really has stuck with me forever. Okay. So, around this time, 1993, I hit a glass ceiling in the Netherlands, and with lots of tears in my eyes, I left my beloved Amsterdam, which I miss every day, and moved to Great Britain, where the world of electroacoustic music, as many of you know, is, I'll put it in inverted commas because there's no money, is thriving. There are 70 universities teaching electroacoustic music in Great Britain. That's insane. But they're recruiting, and there's interest. And, you know, I know, colleagues, the staff members here, how you are struggling. But take my word for it, when the students like the ones that I've been working with this week open their eyes and enjoy this stuff, it's going to happen. It's historical inevitability, and it can have an African twist to it and make it unique and precious, but it's enormous and it's unthinkable for it to go. When I moved to the UK, the main reason I moved, besides the fact that I could become a professor, which I could not in the Netherlands, so I'd hit my peak at 34, it's a bit young, was was community arts, what you guys call here outreach, I think. And so very quickly I got involved with doing professional performances and community outreach with the same group of people. And because I really learned my lesson from what I've been talking about for the rest of this hour, I had two of us working. It was me and a choreographer who would grab some actors as well who knew how to move. And so we created a company called Idéfix Experimental Sound and Movement Theater in '94, and take a theme from daily life. So if we went out into the community, that theme from daily life could be the starting point to do stuff. But for the professional productions or the combined productions, we would use that theme to ensure there's a shared experience with any audience. And we made works flexible for different spaces, but for different publics if we knew different people were coming to it. So over lunch there was a discussion about a piece of checkers or drafts or chess where every move turned into a sound, and I spoke at that time that Cage and Duchamp did a chess game in the variations pieces, which was wired to very simple electronic sounds. But I was stimulated by Cage to take our performers and do this. And you're seeing a collage between two venues. One was a promenade, well they were both promenade performances, but in one case you have the board and in the other one you don't. It doesn't really matter. This is where Duchamp's found object, giving an object a new thought, really works. Anybody can enjoy that. Anybody can enjoy that. And we did this with kids, and we did this with an education disabled group, and we did all sorts of things like this, and it was just magic, the smiles and the lit up faces and all that. So this is really taking it to the next level and getting out of the concert tradition and offering alternatives. That latter space was the Bridgewater Hall, the big concert hall in Manchester, where we were allowed to use the entire building except the concert hall, which was fine with me. Thanks a lot. I blabbed enough. Have a tea break and we'll